What is surprisingly not scientifically proven? Story 1. What exactly the Earth's core is made of and how it works? We know the inner core is solid and the outer core is liquid, and we're pretty confident they're both primarily composed of iron and nickel, plus some other elements. Edit. We don't know its exact composition as we have never directly sampled it. We don't fully understand how the outer core produces the Earth's magnetic field, and we have no idea why the magnetic field periodically weakens and flips. It's kind of surprising when you realize we have a better understanding of what goes on inside the sun than the Earth. Story 2. I'm in pharmacy school, and it's surprising how many medications that are out there that we're still not 100% sure why or how it works. The most surprising thing that I've come across is Tylenol. We know what it's used for and have theories as to how it works, but from a mechanistic point of view, we're not entirely positive. This blew up. I see a lot of people mentioning anesthesia, and the reason I mention Tylenol, acetaminophen, as opposed to anesthesia, is that while we don't know everything about how anesthetics work, we do know some stuff, such as how to change the structure of an inhaled to change the potency slash half-life slash efficacy, how it is eliminated, and generally where they work in the body. As someone mentioned, we have a very good understanding on how local anesthetics work, such as lidocaine and benzocaine. Whereas, as far as I know, we don't know this much about acetaminophen, something which is used more often. Story 3. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Most of the studies that support some sort of significant early morning meal are based purely on school-aged children and tied to attention span or academic achievement. There have been very few, if any, studies comparing large versus small breakfast versus intermittent fasting, IF, versus just eat when you're hungry, protocols, and none focus on weight loss versus athletic performance or just general health. There's also been almost nothing on what defines part of this complete breakfast, as you see in the cereal commercials. Nothing reputable done on high protein, bacon, and eggs versus high carb cereal and toast. It's interesting to me that a saying so taken as fact has so little scientific evidence or protocol. Story 4. The Mcccleintoch effect of women living together syncing their menstrual cycles. Surprisingly, there is no credible scientific evidence of this, aside from the now discredited original study back in the 70s. According to science, women do not sync up, despite common thought. Edit. As many have pointed out, the Mcccleintoch effect is likely real, but it's a purely psychological and perception effect, rather than a biological one. A menstrual cycle really isn't that long, and the chances of syncing up for a while is really quite high. It's like looking at indicators and blinkers on a car ahead. They sync up for a few seconds every now and then. Add a bit of confirmation bias. We only notice when it does happen, not when it doesn't. And boom, a perception of there being a mechanic that sync periods up. Numerous studies of going into nunneries, women's boarding houses, and so on have shown no syncing up beyond pure chance. Keep in mind, though, that the pure chance is actually pretty high anyway, due to the simple mathematics of the cycles. There are also no identified biological mechanisms. Despite what some people claim, there is actually very little evidence for human pheromones, with most scientists dismissing that they exist. It's a controversial subject, to say the least. Story 5. Astronomers here. Many of you have likely heard about pulsars, which are neutron stars the size of a city that rotate as fast as thousands of times a second, and at slowest, a few seconds per spin. We know this because pulsars emit a beam of radiation in the radio spectrum, which we can see each time the pulsar spins, like a lighthouse beam. We also can predict these beams so precisely they are more accurate than atomic clocks for timekeeping, and were used for the first indirect proof of gravitational waves. So it sounds like we know a lot about pulsars, right? Well, get this. No one has a clue what creates the emitted beam in the first place. We have known about these things since the 60s and can do all these amazing experiments using them for timing. But what actually causes the emission? No friggin' clue. Neutron stars are just made of very exotic, very dense fundamental particles in ways that are impossible to recreate on Earth. A teaspoonful of this stuff would weigh about 10 million tons on Earth. So while there's been a lot of theoretical work on this problem, no one knows as yet what causes the radio emission after half a century plus of research. Pretty amazing to think about, if you ask me. Story 6. I can't speak definitively, but it sure seems like there's still a lot of question of how useful SSRIs are against moderate depression. Yet we prescribe millions of people to something that may or may not be marginally better than a placebo. Okay, as a summary of the recent literature, which I know well, SSRIs are a good choice for moderate severe depression. For mild to moderate depression, they show increased efficacy compared to placebo, but the increased efficacy isn't clinically significant. Basically, what that means is that we can tell they are working, but from that data, it's questionable whether it's worth using them since placebo does pretty much the same thing. Some people argue that they are worth considering because there might be individual differences in the response to different SSRIs. Maybe true, maybe not. It's not wrong to prescribe them for mild to moderate depression, but it isn't clear that you should either. More severe depression is more clear. Story 7. We don't know how we taste the salt. The flavor of food is accomplished mostly through the olfactory sense, that is, sense of smell. However, the taste of food is accomplished in the mouth via tongue receptacles, commonly known as taste buds. Everyone knows the different types of taste: bitter, sweet, salty, umami, and sour. Taste buds consist of bundles of receptors for four of these tastes that are kind of like little nets that catch nearby foods and let you know what's in them. The other end of these receptors link up to the brain. There have been some really cool studies where they have dyed the taste bud neuron pathways and have found exactly where the particular taste types are interpreted in the brain. One exception: salt, probably the most important from a dietary and culinary point of view, has no receptor in these clusters within taste buds. We know it's picked up in the mouth, but we have zero understanding of the mechanisms involved. My personal guess is that because salinity in water is so amazingly important for most life, salt detection evolved sooner and on a separate evolutionary pathway compared to the other taste receptors. Still, science remains confused. Story 8: The existence of black holes. Now, don't get me wrong. Almost every physicist and astronomer will tell you they are convinced that black holes exist. However, in order to conclusively prove that a black hole exists, one would have to show a certain size mass exists within a given radius, that is, the Schwarzschild radius. That is, you have to prove a region of space has a density above a certain critical value. This has never been done, and a Nobel Prize still likely awaits. We think we have seen supermassive black holes at the center of galaxies that have no other theoretical explanation other than a black hole. But we have not proven the critical density has been surpassed. Surprising considering black holes are considered obviously real by most. Story 9. An interesting aside to your question is the fact that a lot of scientific research we accept now isn't scientific at all. It is just taking polls and aggregating the data. One example, and by no means the only one, it is just the first to come to mind, is desirability. There is scant scientific evidence on the subject, like, we have shown that gene A causes X behavior. Most research is asking things like, when did you first think you were gay? And extrapolating from that, that one is born gay, because 85% of people asked think they discovered it when they were very young. It makes great headlines, but in the realm of science is meaningless. Story 10. Humans caused climate change. There is significant evidence that many of the early studies conducted regarding the topic were either falsified or left out key details and disregarded certain results. The cardinal sin of science. Additionally, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth makes many predictions, all of which so far have been false. Other key factors that no one's talking about is the massive gain in mass of Antarctic ice. Also, sunspot activity, which is dying down, reducing the amount of UV rays that the sun produces. Also, carbon dioxide makes up about 0.04% of our atmosphere. The best estimates that science can provide suggest that it may go as high as 0.05%, and that is going to kill all biodiversity and millions of humans when the temperature rises? Give me a break. Look, I'm not saying the climate isn't changing. Any idiot with a thermometer and a pen and paper can test that. All I want is some good, objective science to retest what idiots like Bill Nye, who is an engineer and entertainer, not a scientist, are preaching. Have some skepticism, folks. It's good for you. Story 11. Nothing is scientifically proven. The only application of proof in science is in mathematics. If you were going to use the legal sense of proof, that is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence, then I suppose you could say that there are certain things that are proven. But science wouldn't use that term except colloquially. Science doesn't offer proofs. It offers explanations that best fit the available evidence. Gravity hasn't even been proven in science. Neither has the germ theory of disease. We haven't even proved atomic theory, even when he dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, because that isn't how the game of science works. Story 12, everything. Science doesn't actually prove things. It can't. What science does is disprove things. Science can fail to disprove things, which sometimes gives us real good reason to believe a given hypothesis. When mixed with a bit of statistics and various assumptions, scientists can compute probabilities that something might be true. Sometimes these numbers are very high, but science never proves things, not in the way that people think it does. It's not mathematics. We can never be fully 100% certain that a scientific truth is real. Most people would find this surprising and or unbelievable. At some point, you accept that things with high confidence values are true for practical purposes, engineering, medicine, etc. But it is incorrect to call them proven. Every once in a while, an assumption gets noticed, further investigation gets done, and something dearly believed gets overturned. That is science. Story 13, I work in a resort, and the spa consultants, since they have to sell spa services, are under the belief that many of the things we offer have scientifically proven benefits. And I'm not talking about things like massage is proven to help you relax. Duh, we know that. I'm talking about the idea of a seaweed wrap, getting rid of all of your toxins, cryotherapy curing illnesses, and craniosacral massage giving you energy. In addition, they are under the belief that juice cleanses give you energy and reduce depression. They believe that drinking cider vinegar is the key to weight loss and all of that nonsense. In fact, I got caught in a conversation about cryotherapy with one of the spa consultants. I even flat out stated, it's not backed by science. She got defensive. OMG, like, yes, it is. No, it's not. Most doctors with any credibility at all whatsoever have been advising against cryotherapy for obvious reasons. Story 14. You know how people are sometimes capable of performing incredible feats of strength when in situations of great stress or duress? This phenomenon is very well documented by various news sources. Things like this happening in front of crowds, etc. But science has no idea why or how. There's theories out there about adrenaline, or your brain sort of unlocking strength that you have but don't use because it would shatter your joints, stuff like that. But this can't be studied because it really only happens when a person believes they are in incredible danger. So the whole massive burst of adrenaline thing, not a myth per se, but not scientifically proven either. Story 15, chiropractic medicine, specifically vertebral subluxation. My admittedly limited research shows the scientific community being split at best. The studies seem to show it's no more or less effective than other treatments for things like lower back pain. And with other treatments being not very effective, there isn't much evidence to show that chiropractic goes beyond placebo. Disclaimer: I have no connection to chiropractic. I'm not in any medical field. I've never been wronged by a chiropractor, never known a chiropractor. Just answering the question because I thought it was surprising that something so mainstream is actually considered pseudoscience by many in the medical field. Story 16, that what we are ultimately, that which is understanding these words, whether it is happening through the body or not, is located inside the flesh body or is a result of the flesh body. We can call that consciousness or awareness, but to me, the simple word existence rings the most true since I experience myself as existence, that which I see outside the flesh body, and that which I sense as the body in my experience share the same source, the source which is pure existence, pure being, non-local aliveness or presence. What keeps us from getting this first-hand experience is the overactive thinking mind, which keeps up the self-identity as a person, and the chronic accumulated muscle tensions in the body that create a sense of being located inside the body, instead of feeling yourself as pure, non-local, empty, self-luminous presence in which the sensations of the body, the image of the world, and the other sense perceptions arise. Story 17, Universal Theory of Gravity. I mean, we all can see gravity exists and acts on us, but we assume we know how it works, and we just don't. The thing to make clear here is that a law and a theory are different. A law tells us what happens and will often allow us to calculate exactly what, in this case, Newton's law of gravitation. But a theory tells us why something happens. One of the things I hear really often is, yeah, but evolution is only a theory, which winds me up no end. Regardless, gravity is a force which two objects exert on each other relative to their mass. But no one has any idea why this happens. Also, what's the opposite force to gravity? Story 18. The methodology by which the brain gives rise to the mind. Consciousness itself is a woefully understudied subject in science. After all, without consciousness, we wouldn't even have science. Many animals have brains, that chunk of squishy meat which processes sensory information. But few animals have minds, that virtual space in which conscious thought resides. Some non-human animals have what we understand as rudimentary minds in comparison to humans, but it's largely a mystery as to why. Brain development or structure or size doesn't automatically determine how advanced an animal's mind is. Indeed, a lot of mental development has to do with culture and environment. But we have yet to understand what elements of the physical brain interact in what ways to produce the virtual mind. Story 19. You know that hidden superpower we tap into during life or death situations? You hear stories of a 13-year-old lifting a car off the ground to rescue their crushed grandpa, or the woman who ripped a car door off its hinges to save her child trapped inside. We have very little understanding of the overclocking of human potential. We can't legally recreate the fear that comes from a life or death situation in a lab. If the experiment subject knows it's just an experiment, they will not experience a genuine reaction. And it's illegal to put experimentees in real danger. So it is unlikely we will ever be able to fully study the fight, flight, or freeze response in humans to figure out why we can unlock hidden strength in times of danger. Why can we run faster if it's away from a bear? How much faster exactly? Why do we need to be in danger of dying to reach that higher speed? Can we reach that faster speed without having a fight, flight, or freeze response? Story 20. Whether black holes actually exist. Yes, we see gravitational things that have the power predicted by theoretical modeling of a black hole, but there is no proof yet that they are actually black, with an event horizon that prevents everything from escaping. It's possible a black hole is actually gray, with no event horizon, but does indeed allow things that cross the theoretical event horizon to eventually escape. The Event Horizon Telescope, EHT, is intended to directly image the black hole event horizon if it exists. That should mostly settle the question as to whether a black hole is truly black. But even then, there's still a possibility that the black hole is actually gray with some previously entered matter and or radiation and or information and leaking out of it, not including Hawking radiation, which is already expected and is uncontroversial as far as I know. I expect the first eyes to view an actual black hole will probably see something that we today did not predict. Maybe the EHT will deliver the first of many surprises. Story 21. Quantum Immortality. The idea is this. The many worlds theory is that there is a parallel universe that exists where every possible outcome of any particular event occurs. So, if you were to die, there would be a parallel universe in which you do not die at that moment. Now, surely eventually everyone, including you, will die of old age in our universe. But in another universe parallel to ours, you don't die of old age at the moment that you otherwise would in this one, but you survive for perhaps a second longer. However, there is a parallel universe where you live a second longer still, and on and on and on until you reach a parallel universe where you just never die. Of all the infinite parallel universes, there is one where you are essentially immortal. Granted, this is really more of a thought experiment and perhaps a misinterpretation of physics, but it is kind of interesting. Story 22. A truly post-scarcity society. No requirement of labor in exchange for the vast majority of goods and services. No currency. The vast majority of necessary labor being automated and the rest being voluntary. Surprisingly, it's not human nature or technology that prevents it at this point. It's just too big of a change, and most people do not believe it's possible. Either they think we're not far enough with technology, or they think that humans are naturally too greedy or unwilling to cooperate. Studies consistently show that is a learned behavior, not a natural instinct. I do believe it could be done on a small scale and grow. I'm even working on a few ideas that would be intended to demonstrate the concept. I think the more people understand the possibility, the better the chance that one day we could at least have a small societal group that functions fully this way. Story 23, my favorite theoretical material, unipolar magnets. It's a magnet where both sides are positive or negative, a magnet that only repels or only attracts. The physics is over my head, but basically the formula and theories we use for normal magnets can also be used to prove the existence of unipolar magnets. So either these things exist or we don't really know why magnets work, both of which are entirely possible. Now, such a thing might only exist in some incredibly esoteric condition with no practical application, but it would prove the formula. But if it could be just as practical as a normal magnet, it would have incredible application. Like an electric motor works by powering an electromagnet, which revolves around a center point. But if it was a unipolar magnet, it would run without electricity. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? A motor that just runs on physics, never stops, doesn't require electricity. But it's just an unproven theoretical state. Story 24. How animals perceive time. Dogs use their sense of smell to tell time. They took a dog who would get excited 10 to 15 minutes before his owner arrived home and set up cameras. Every day, 10 to 15 minutes before, the dog would spring up and wait at the door. One day, they pumped the smell of the owner's clothes into the house all day. The dog had no idea that the owner was coming home till he heard the door. They think dogs use declining smell as a time-telling system. The less they smell the scent, they know the longer it has been and can even remember exact diminished smells to associate with time. Story 25. Monarch butterfly migration. It ranks as one of the longest migrations among all animals, from northern US and southern Canada, converging to a pinpoint spot in the Mexican mountains, thousands of miles away. What makes this remarkable that the generation that leaves Mexico in the spring will give rise to 3 generations on the way north. Each generation dies after mating, and it is the 3rd generation that will travel south in the fall to make it in time to winter over in Mexico. It is not known how they know how to travel thousands of miles south to that very specific place high in the Mexican mountains. How was this information transferred from grandparent to parent to offspring? Semi-relevant comment. A few years ago, my mom and I went down and visited their sanctuaries, or whatever they were called, where the monarchs roosted. Massive trees with thousands upon thousands of butterflies. They weighed the branches down. It was super dope. One of the coolest trips we've done. Bouncing around in real Mexico, trying to scrape by with barely any Spanish and exploring awesome stuff. We'd always been involved with monarchs and butterflies, like raising them and stuff when I was young. Doing elementary school science fair type stuff. Having pen pals with kids in Mexico, tracking them. Butterflies, not kids. The whole bit. It was fun and definitely awesome to see in person.